Hamas massacre of 1,200 Israelis and taking of hostages, and the beginning of the harsh Israeli military response, which has taken more than 35,000 Palestinian lives, the great majority of them women and children, civilians, I should say, including women and children. We've seen the following interesting phenomenon, that the Anti-Defamation League, which is the sort of main Jewish defense organization that monitors anti-Semitism, and the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE, which does almost the same thing on for the Muslim community, both of them have reported unprecedented spikes in both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And yet, instead of standing together against this upsurge of bigotry against both our communities, we're fighting each other at the moment. Indeed, as noted above, one of the core principles, as Sabeeha mentioned, of the movement is that we need to stand up for each other. Jews and Muslims need to stand up for each other when either community comes under attack. And yet, grotesquely, all the hardening progress that we saw during over, I'd say, close to 15 years or more, starting around 2006 or 7 in this field, and there were many moments when Jews and Muslims stood up for each other. All of that really feels at risk right now. And part of the thing, and we talk about bigotry against both communities, is that one of the maybe you could say dirty little secrets of that is that much of the bigotry is coming from each community against the other. So it's not just from the outside, but there's so much hostility being evinced that we're seeing attacks from Muslims on Jews, Jews on Muslims, and this is happening, quite honestly, at the very worst possible moment, because at this moment, both our communities are under attack from rapidly rising white Christian nationalism, which has become part and parcel of Trumpism as the 2024 election cycle gets underway in earnest. So unfortunately, at the moment, we Jews and Muslims are playing directly into the hands of those who wish us harm, wish both of us harm.
So what do we do? And did you hear an echo? Do you hear me okay, or is there an echo?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue. So how do we deal with this, and how do we get there? As a first step, we need to understand one another and how each side views the conflict. And that means stepping out of our silos, overcoming our tribal instincts, seeing where the other's pain is coming from, and allowing our hearts to expand. American Muslims feel dread at the new wave of Islamophobia. Muslims are resentful at being pressured to speak out against Hamas's action when they feel that there has been relative silence by many Jews over the oppression Palestinians have endured for decades under Israeli occupation. They question the fairness of our government's unconditional support of Israel with no accountability. They see the media as being one-sided, elected officials downplaying the disproportionate loss of life of over 35,000 civilians in Gaza, including at least 20,000 women and children, displacement of 2.2 million Gazans, Gaza razed to the ground, and their call for a permanent ceasefire being ignored. Muslims feel that the prevailing pro-Israel zeitgeist in American society makes it difficult or unsafe for them to speak up for Palestinians or risk being labeled anti-Semites or supporters of terrorism. The censure of Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib being one example. Meanwhile, nearly half of Muslim families with schoolmate children are facing bullying by classmates and teachers. 3 young college students were shot in Vermont and a 6-year-old stabbed to death in Michigan. In campuses across America, riot police have been called upon peaceful pro-Palestinian protesters, and students have been beaten, arrested, and detained. In one instance at UCLA, counter-protesters hurled stones, incendiary objects, and 2x4s at pro-Palestinian protesters, while the police stood by and looked on. Walter, how does the Jewish community feel about this?
Well, members of the Jewish community, Sabeeha, feel that that Muslim leaders and the Muslim community has not gone far enough to denounce Hamas for its brutal, life-destroying rampage that I spoke about on October 7th, killing 1,200 Israelis, which was the deadliest, which is accurately described as the deadliest one-day spasm of anti-Jewish violence since the Holocaust. They also feel threatened by the dramatic rise of anti-Semitic incidents across the U.S., including at pro-Palestinian rallies on college campuses. There was an interesting article in the New York Times just 2 days ago that talked about how many Jews, I mean, this feeling of being under siege on campuses and anti-Semitism, a lot of it is sort of feeling that they have been canceled by former friends or mentors in their sororities and fraternities and other campus institutions, even sometimes professors, for daring to assert that they remain Zionists or care about the well-being of Israel. And even many Jews who oppose Israel's military incursion into Gaza as massive overkill, I would include myself in those, that has taken far, far too many civilian lives, are angered by the widespread description of the invasion of Israel's invasion of Gaza by many Muslim and Palestinian and pro-Palestinian leaders as, quote, genocide, unquote. They feel strongly, the Jews do, that the Israeli invasion was precipitated, after all, by the brutal Hamas attack on Israel. That's what it was caused by, and therefore is deeply wrong-headed and even anti-Semitic to charge the faith community that was attacked and the faith community which endured the Holocaust as itself carrying out a genocide. The charge of genocide triggers in Jews a sense of isolation and vulnerability, compounded by a growing fear of many Jews, including myself, that Israel's very existence may be at risk. Pro-Israel Jews, especially, have been alarmed in recent weeks to see the spreading of the demonstrations, the encampments on campuses across America. Many of them feel deeply hurt to see the emergence of groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and other anti-Zionist Jews playing such a large role in the protests. And finally, many pro-Israel Jews feel alarmed that Israel's critics in the political system, in the Democratic Party, have really, in particular, have really grown since October 7th. And so it's no longer just the squad, but people like Bernie Sanders, himself Jewish, and Chris Van Hollen, my senator here in Maryland, who have been pushing for resolutions making continued U.S. military aid to Israel. It should not be used in ways that violate human rights. So all of this, all of these feelings, right or wrong, from depending on the perspective, but one can say for sure that it leaves the pro-Israel Jewish community, which is most of the American Jewish community, feeling isolated and stigmatized in a way that it has not, I would say, in many, many decades. And I've been covering this conflict my whole adult life, probably since the 1967 war.
We just talked about how each side feels about it, that we need to understand. Let's pivot now and discuss what each community expects of the other. I would want the Jewish community to understand how much the plight of the Palestinians and justice for them means to us. Understand how much it hurts us to see Palestinians living under occupation, the blockade of Gaza, the controls on what goes in and out of Gaza, demolition of homes in Jerusalem, checkpoints in the West Bank, administrative detentions, what it is like to live in daily humiliation, robbed of freedom and dignity, seeing their lands being taken over by settlers, living as second-class citizens in Israel, and the dehumanization of Palestinians, all of which escalated post-October 7. It hurts. We are not asking American Jews to solve the problem, but just to acknowledge and understand our pain. I denounce what Hamas did on October 7th. This goes against the rules, against Islamic law, against the rules of warfare. You don't hurt civilians. You don't hurt women and children. You don't destroy personal property. I want to hear American Jews speak out and denounce Israel government's relentless bombardment of Gaza. Not statements, but actions. I would like to see my Jewish brethren call upon their elected officials and register their objection to the killing of civilians, women, and innocents. Stop the bombing of homes, stop the displacement of women and children, and object to the desecration of cemeteries and the stripping of men. It will mean something when elected officials hear American Jews lodge their objections. Having said that, I applaud the courage of many American Jews, like the JVP and many others, who have spoken, protested, and campaigned for an end to the carnage. I cringe each time I hear Palestinians being referred to as terrorists. After all the terror that Palestinians have endured, starting with the Nakba in 1948 and over the last 75 years, living in fear of being raided, of their homes being raided and them being hurled off to jail, families burned to death after right-wing settlers torched their homes, and now over 1 million living in fear of being wiped out. Can we justify, after all this, can we justify calling them terrorists? But somehow the label has stuck, and the term Palestinians and terrorists are used interchangeably, almost as a given. Understand how that makes us feel. Address the root cause of the conflict. Killing and wiping out Hamas isn't going to solve the problem. If Palestinians can meet their basic necessities like food, water, a home, a job, a life of dignity, are self-reliant and not under constant siege, Hamas will die. Militant movements emerge when people are desperate. Unless the desperation and misery of the Palestinians is addressed, another Hamas-like entity will emerge. Address the root cause, the humanitarian issue. Terrorism will die a natural death. There is also a visceral belief in the Muslim community that the term anti-Semitism is being weaponized to censor and silence criticism of Israeli government's actions in Gaza and beyond. Anti-Semitism is a terrible sentiment and deserves to be denounced. But if it is applied to any criticism of the Israeli government's policies, it will dilute its potency. Criticizing Israeli politicians is just that, a criticism of politicians. It is not a criticism of the Jewish community at large. I would like to see American Jews call out those who misapply the term. Otherwise, it will lead to resentment and a further increase in anti-Semitism. I would like to see the Jewish community call it out when pro-Palestinian voices are dealt with unjustly. For example, doxing of students on campuses by potential employers. For example, writers getting cancelled and firing from jobs for posting pro-Palestinian statements on social media. For example, surveillance of pro-Palestinian students, protesters, where their photos are plastered on trucks, their home addresses publicized, death threats issued, assaults, visits by FBI, and tarred as pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, or Hamas sympathizers. For example, unleashing riot police on peaceful protesters on campuses. For example, universities are being pressured to shut down Jewish Voices for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine. Columbia has already done that, and shutting down some Muslim student associations. For example, 13 students at Harvard this week barred from graduating. For example, a Muslim TV anchor being cancelled. And one last point. Demand from the US government that they lift the embargo of food and humanitarian assistance by the United Nations, UNRWA. Palestinian women and children are starving. Starving. demand that they stop the unconditional funding of offensive weapons to Israel. We are aiding and abetting a massacre.
Thanks, Sabeeha.
What do you expect from the Muslim community?
Yeah, well, before I get into that, I just wanted to say that I agree with you on one big piece, which is the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the intentional weaponization of anti-Semitism in recent months to shut down debate and censor is, in my mind, wrong-headed and counterproductive, and is being pushed forward, by the way, by political forces that are intent on driving a wedge between our communities. For example, Representative Elise Stefanik and her successful gotcha attack that forced the resignations of the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and Harvard, even though there was no evidence that students on either campus had called for genocide against Jews, which was what she was saying. How can you be quiet when this is happening? And that sent a chilling signal about academic freedom on campuses across the country. But they got away with it, and they did it again last month with the president of Colombia, as you know, which led her, I believe, literally the day after her testimony in Congress, where she was being beaten up by these people, to call for the police to come on campus and clear the encampment. That led to a chain reaction of universities across the country doing that, and I think that's been very, very destructive. So that in a sense is coming from Congress, from the Republicans, especially in Congress and elsewhere, and as part of the Trump kind of campaign for president. And yet, certainly, they're taking their cues in some ways from mainstream Jewish organizations that have also spearheaded some of these kinds of efforts, which again I believe is wrong and it's self-defeating. Because one thing I know about Jewish history is that censorship has never been good for the Jews, and the Jews in America have a very proud record of fighting for civil rights in the 60s, fighting against McCarthyism and opposing the Vietnam War, and so for us now to be playing a role of encouraging censorship, to me is deeply offensive and wrong. And yet, I would say, in seeking to understand where this is coming from, that a stance that anti-Zionism or even criticism of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians is tantamount to anti-Semitism, which is very often not the case, and maybe most of the time not the case. But it's important to comprehend, in understanding this, the great hurt that the Jewish community is feeling, and the sense of being abandoned and betrayed by longtime allies, including people in the Muslim community leaders in the Muslim community who Jews feel have barely mentioned what happened on October 7th. The term genocide, which I talked about, is used for Israel, but to Jews, what Hamas did that day felt clear that it showed clear genocidal intent. In other words, to literally kill every Jew they could get their hands on, except for those that they were taking hostage. And yet it's Israel that's accused of committing genocide without mentioning Hamas's actions. And I wanted to share one example where a couple of weeks after after October 7th, I was in conversation with a Muslim, a very good friend of mine who was a lead outreach leader at a mosque, and it's one of the most important, I would say, mosques in America. And he called me to say that he just wanted me to let me know that he was sorry for what had happened on October 7th personally. And he said what Sabeeha said a few minutes ago here, that this is not Islam. And I said to him, thank you so much. This is very moving for me. But couldn't your imam, who we both know very well, say this also and say this publicly? And to my shock at that moment, my friend said, no, he can't. The imam cannot say that, because that would lead to almost a revolt, perhaps within the mosque. The feelings were running so high about what Israel was doing in Gaza that he couldn't say a word about what had, after all, precipitated what was happening in Gaza. And, my reaction was at the time, internal reaction, I certainly don't think I said this to him, but I said, you know what, if that's the case, that an imam with whom we've worked on Jewish-Muslim relations now for 15 years can't even speak out against the mass murder of Jews for fear of a negative reaction in his community. So, what good is he to us? Where do we stand? It was, it was that kind of a moment. And so somehow Jews still would like or are craving for Muslims to say what Sabeeha said, to say what my friend said privately to me, that this is wrong, this is an abomination of Islam. Now, as we'll see, I think in a minute, and I want to talk about that, coming to it, that some of the expectations on both sides are unrealistic and counterproductive even, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But the fact is that the expectations are there, the expectations that Sabeeha and I laid out. We would love, both communities would love to hear this from the other. So, Sabeeha, what steps then should be taken at this point, having laid out all the pain?
At this point, yes, and in this very moment. Number one, show up for the other. Show courage and reach out to each other. Acknowledge the other's pain and fears, even if we don't agree on the crisis. Acknowledge the pain of family of hostages, of the starvation and deaths in Gaza, of the desperation in the West Bank. So keep that lunch appointment with your Jewish colleague or a walk in the park with your Muslim neighbor. Invite your Muslim or Jewish friend who you may have been avoiding in the past few months to a dinner in your home. Break bread together. Number two, be an upstander. We appeal to our fellow Muslims and Jews to look out for the safety of the other. If you notice any suspicious activity, promptly notify the authorities. Be an upstander when riding the train or bus, and watch out for the fellow Jew in the yarmulke or the Muslim woman in the hijab. Third, parents, counsel your children. Listen to your children's questions and concerns. Help them understand the conflict and don't give them more than what they ask for. Reassure them. Enable them to see the humanity in their fellow students. Caution them against making ethnic remarks and guide them on responding if bullied. Fourth, organize small interfaith prayer groups and forums designed to evoke empathy. Start an ongoing Torah Quran study group. I'm part of one. Number 5, raise awareness about our commonalities and shared history. I just talked about the commonalities, and on shared history, focus on moments in history that unified us. For example, when in the 7th century, Caliph Umar freed Jerusalem from Byzantine rule and invited 70 Jewish families from Tiberias to settle in Jerusalem. Until then, Jews had long been banned from Jerusalem and its environs. For example, during World War II, Muslims were rescuers of Jews in Albania, Morocco, Turkey, Iran, Kosovo, Sarajevo, Tangier, and Paris. For example, when Islamophobia and anti-Semitism raised its head during the Trump presidency, and Jews and Muslims stood by each other and helped avert an existential threat. 6, let's refrain from labeling one another or labeling the actions of the other with loaded terms like terrorism, genocide, or anti-Semitic. It only drives us further apart. We can settle for less incendiary terms and still get our message across. And 7, on a macro level, the leaders of the two sides should quit blaming and flaming at each other and resolve to end the campaign that threatens the freedom of speech of the other. If we keep this up, we'll destroy nearly 2 decades of courageous and creative coalition building and hand a huge victory to our common enemies. Walter, you want to add a few more?
Yeah, just
action steps?
A couple more. And the big one that I would like to put out there is let's cut each other some slack and find the heart to forgive and reconcile. And, you know, as I said, despite what Sabeeha and I have been articulating above of what Muslims want to hear from Jews and what Jews want to hear from Muslims about the present war and overall Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we also need to understand that many in the other community, including folks who have been involved in our work, in this work for years, and we hope and expect there'll be allies going forward. These folks are simply not able to meet our needs at the moment, at the present. Many American Muslims are not condemning the Hamas attack as attempted genocide. Many Jews cannot accept Muslim demands that we join in demanding a ceasefire and characterizing Israel's harsh military response as genocidal. We could go into, the meaning of genocide and going this way and that way, but I'm just saying, I just feel like given the stakes that for all of us in terms of standing together against the rapid rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and bigotry here at home, that we have to find it in our hearts to forgive each other and take steps to renew our alliance, even while disagreeing respectfully. We need to not only disagree respectfully, but with compassion for each other on how to end the present terrible conflict in Israel and Palestine, while vowing to stand together for democracy, pluralism, and religious freedom here at home. All of us need to acknowledge that we don't have the formula to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, after all, has been going on for over 100 years in one form or another, ravaging the lives of good people on both sides. I say 100 years because even though the state of Israel was created 75 years ago, the conflict by that time was already, at least 25 or more years in the process. And what has occurred in that conflict, that terrible 100-year conflict in the Holy Land, is, I believe, an existential tragedy for both peoples. And the only way to end it is for Israelis and Palestinians to acknowledge that they are fated to live together in a tiny land the size of my home state of Maryland. So they got to live together in that tiny space, and they need to figure out a way to do that in peace, with justice and self-determination for all human beings living between the river and the sea. And by the same token, we Muslims and Jews in America will need to live together here to humanize each other and to work in partnership to ensure that our communities, which are the two largest minority faith communities in America, have full rights to express freely and to express ourselves freely and to live out our faith traditions fully. Sabeeha, do you want to conclude?
Regardless of the outcome of the war, Muslim and Jewish communities in America will need to double and triple their efforts to re-engage and revitalize our alliance, mend relationships triggered by this war, and prevent further fractures. If anything, the day after the war finally ends is bound to present a series of challenges to both our communities in the US, as Israelis and Palestinians struggle to resolve their decades-old issue. This is not going away anytime soon, and our strategy must be immediate and long-term. The stratagem that we have outlined are a start, which must be sustained through alliances with mainstream Christian and other minority communities. Those of us who care for the well-being of both Muslim and Jews must stand together to protect democracy and pluralism in America. Both our communities and all of America have a huge amount riding on the success of these endeavors. Walter, you want to have the last word?
Well, the last word is we just invite you, before we get to the Q&A, to buy our book, We Refuse to Be Enemies, which we think is absolutely as relevant today as it was when we wrote it almost 3 years ago. And the second thing is that the two of us, you are the first to hear it, but we will be starting a new podcast, Sabeeha and I, in the next few weeks, called We Refuse to Be Enemies. Why argue with a good title, a good slogan? And so we're going to be doing a weekly podcast. We hope that we will both dialogue with each other as we did today, and then but also talk to people in the field, and all about how do we deal with this present crisis, how do we get out of this mess, both over there, but even more importantly for us over here where we live. So we hope that anyway, we will I know Ola will let you know, and when this thing will get going. We'd love to have you as to come and join our podcast. So thank you so much for listening, and
Thank
we're
you.
happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walter and Sabeeha. This was a very deep and enlightening conversation, and you gave us different perspectives to think about. And yes, I think I don't think we can solve the issue, but I think we can learn how to have discussions on this issue, and hopefully help in many ways, advocate for our local governments to change their views and listen to the people. So I think that's very, very important. So we'll begin now the audience Q&A. So please kindly be respectful of our speakers, and have your questions be focused obviously on this topic. And if you'd like to, you can either raise your hand like this, or you can use the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, or that would help us know who wants to ask a question, and you can then unmute yourself and ask a question. So I'll wait for anybody who would like to. I have some questions myself that I would like to ask Sabeeha and Walter, but I'd like to give it to the audience first, to give you a chance to ask your questions. I'm sure there's a lot of things in your mind that you'd like to ask. Don't be shy. If you you could actually just go like this with your hand if you don't know how to use the reactions button. That's fine too. I'll take a look. I won't be able to see that if you don't have your video on. So if you don't have your video on, you need to use the reactions button, so I know that you need a question. But there's not that many people, so you could actually also unmute yourself and just ask a question directly. So I'll wait a second, and I'll start with a question that I have. Walter, can you discuss the situation with Jews who are not Zionists and that criticize the state of Israel? Many of them are told they themselves, who are Jews, and celebrate all the Jewish traditions and things like that, are anti-Semitic, which to me, doesn't make any sense. Can you talk about this?
Sure. How many hours do you have? Well, let me start. First of all, I have to say that I have been surprised by the degree to which this emergence of this large group of, and seems quite significant, of anti-Zionist Jews through Jewish Voice for Peace suddenly emerged since October 7th. That was something that, in general, you could say that the larger eruption of student activism on this issue was quite striking, because for the last 20 years, the Palestinian issue seems to have been marginalized to the point where everybody, and certainly Netanyahu, thought he could get away with just going around the Palestinians, that he already had peace with UAE and some of the other states, the Arabian, Bahrain, and even Morocco, and now he was moving toward getting something with the Saudis, it looked like, and then suddenly this Hamas attack happened, and I believe that's exactly why Hamas attacked at that point, but that it's been I would acknowledge that what they tried to do has been quite successful, as much as I'm horrified and sickened by it, because I think they knew very well that they would trigger exactly the response that they have, which, this really, as Biden put it in the understatement of the year, over the top response, that has, turned much of the world and large sections of young Americans against Israel, which hasn't happened in this way before. So it is very significant. I personally, so I want to share one other thing there. I have a difference, and part of it is probably my age, and part of it is that I lived in Israel for a number of years. And in terms of my own relationship, let's say, with the anti-Zionist Jews, first of all, I respect them. I personally don't demonize them. They certainly are being demonized by some in the mainstream community. But I have to say that I myself I would no longer call myself a Zionist. This is something that happened already over the last couple of years since we wrote the book with Sabeeha. But that is due to my own realization. I believed all my life as a Zionist that I in a democratic Jewish state in Israel, and that should be obviously alongside a Palestinian state, so that there would be room for self-determination for both peoples. And yet it was Israel's own actions, or the actions of the settlers supported by the Israeli government over many decades, which really made that impossible. It virtually made the two-state solution impossible by moving hundreds of thousands, maybe 750,000 Jews into the West Bank, and and mixing the population. So I said to myself at a certain point, well, how can that be called Zionism? If Zionism was the idea of having a Jewish state, why would you intentionally sabotage a Jewish state, a democratic Jewish state, by doing that? So I sort of said, maybe, I sort of feel like Zionism left me, but I didn't, rather than me leaving Zionism. But that's myself. But the reason I mention it, though, is that I have that perception that I'm a post-Zionist, but I'm a post-Zionist who loves Israel. And that has to do very much with my life experience of having lived there, of having lived many of the happiest years of my life in Israel, both as a child and as a young adult, and having remained very connected to it, and speaking the language, and loving the culture and the land and the food and many things, the music, and that for me is not only about the Jewish piece of it, that includes the Palestinian piece of it as well. So it's a little more complicated. But in other words, where I have problems with the Jewish Voice for Peace is that it seems to me that they have joined this larger group who really are presenting Israel as kind of a demonic place, a terrible Nazi Germany on steroids or something. And to me, that is wrong. I mean, I just come at it from the point of view, well, look, here's my life experience. I lived there. Of course, I understood that many terrible things were happening, and I was there living as a Jew, and I was getting all the goodies. But the goodies were good, and I did not feel it as a repressive, ugly place. And many of my best friends, many family members, all of that. So I can't join in somehow demonizing Israel. And I do feel that JVP does that. And I think that's very unfortunate. And I've had some conversations with members of JVP in recent weeks, and so we're having sort of a dialogue about that. But anyway, I hope that gives some answer to your question.
Sure. It does a little bit, and I think some of the JVP people that I know, I think, are just, for me, critical of what is happening. Like I don't see from, or I don't feel from them that they hate Israel, but that they hate the actions that it's taking against innocent people, that it's taken for a long time, and the, like you said, the settlements that have literally usurped practically almost all of the West Bank, leaving certain towns in the West Bank that are Palestinian having to go this way and that way, and not being able to go on a straight road, and would take people maybe half a day to get from one little town to the other that's 15 minutes apart. I mean, it's just, I think that those are the things that are, in my mind, like a little kid would say, not fair. But John has a question. John, unmute yourself and ask your question before I ask my other question.
And I couldn't agree more with all you just said, Ola, just to share that. Okay, go ahead.
Brief introduction. Name is John Crisco, Reverend.
Go ahead, John. We
My
can
name
hear
is
you.
Reverend Dr. Okay, great. That's Reverend Dr. John Crisco. I've been an interfaith minister for some 3 years. I was on the board of the Interfaith Center of New York for 19. A lot of interfaith work with Westchester. I've been president of a local dialogue interfaith group for 6 years. I've never seen a time when people stop talking to each other, and I super appreciate our common belief and everybody here participating, both the presenters and the people, that it's important to keep the dialogue, the very practical suggestions. I'd love to have copies of these practical suggestions, because we say our prayers to remind us of what is true and what we aspire to and the best of us. So in a certain way, I look at them as almost not a prosaic, but almost prayerful, in the sense of reminding us of what's eternally true and necessity of keeping on track. And we need more than ever these kind of guidelines, these guardrails, so we don't just fly off like everybody else. The lack of, and so I love, through common belief or whatever, the best practices. This is what I've heard. Here's something coming up, because there's so much other material. It would be great to have on some regular basis, because I suspect and have some evidence that there are good things happening locally. People are reaching out. I know people in the Temple Mount, Muslims, and they're doing things on the ground, but we don't hear an awful lot of that. And we need to, it's not countering the other information. I'm not suggesting that, but give another perspective that will remind us of what's true, so that we could get back to that place. Because I also believe the day after a certain level of the violence takes place, it'll go on the ground. And if we don't have a future vision, and that's not going to happen without us talking to each other. I was horrified at every level. I was horrified on day one. It was hours after it took place on October 7th. Majlis Azura, a very large ombudsman Muslim organization in New York, only talked about it's as if nothing had happened to, this was October 7th. This isn't last month. The day of, there's no mention of the horror that had just taken place. It was about the Palestinian justice. Okay, it's no question about that. AJC, whatever they put out, when they're putting out, there's no mention of the horror. So it's not gonna. It doesn't seem like it's gonna happen from on top. And if it doesn't happen on top yet, it'll have to happen down below, and it'll happen best from my perspective if we have some of these best practices shared, and have more of what I'm so delighted that you and everyone has participated in. Is we can't hate. We've got to go have lunch, keep the dog. It's been such a strain in the group that I'm a part of, but it's happening a little bit. Some of the people, in spite of it, are talking to each other again, and it's that there's no hope without it. I'm not sure what form the hope will take going forward, but if we stop talking and sharing the very best of what we are, that we've built up over decades, in many cases longer, 40 years, then it's going to be without hope. So I think we need to almost counter the press, or balance the press. It's not, I don't want to hear these other voices, but we do need to have some of these more bridge building voices out there. So I really appreciate that, and look forward to looking to your sites and other sites and any of the people that are participating, maybe to share resources that they have. It's a very important time to share these kinds of resources with each other. That's it. Thank you. And actually, a question that, because it's a question, has a long intro, is how can we, any suggestions for developing best practices, for sharing the best of things?
Can you repeat your question, John, again?
I guess he was asking any ideas for sharing best practices along the lines that he was talking about.
Yeah, John, thank you. Thank you for your commentary. Thank you for sharing your feelings about this. Ola, we will be happy, right, Walter, to share our talking points with you, and you can share it with your network and with the participants today. We have also posted some of this script before immediately after October 7th, We published an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun. We can share that with you as well, Ola. And then again, as Walter said, we are going to be starting a podcast, and we hope to touch on the immediate issues and along the same lines of, okay, so what are our best practices? What do we recommend? But for now, we'll be happy to share our talking points with you, Ola, for the benefit of everybody. And thank you, John, for raising it.
Right. And John, just so you know, actually, I'm part of a group, we're here in Westchester, and there is a press release that's on my website under press releases that we did very soon after, I can't remember exactly when we did it, but it was after October 7th, and it was a very balanced press release. So I encourage you to take a look at that on our website. And I believe, I wanted to also share with everybody that actually I'm doing this type of conversation in my own home. And I have a reverend, and I have who's from Episcopal Church. I have a Jewish woman rabbi, and another Jewish person who's a friend of my other person that's coming, that's part of this talking conversation group, and she's Palestinian Christian. A lot of people forget that they're Palestinian Christians, they're not all just Muslim. And so this is somebody that she knows, that she's worked with in the past. So we're having difficult conversations. They went to something and it kind of disturbed them, and they almost like didn't want to continue, but I kind of pushed the whole conversation, saying, no, don't let one incident talk about it, but let's get together and discuss what is it that upset you. But that doesn't mean we stop talking. So it's very challenging, but it's very important. And Alma had a question.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that on my website, sabeeharehman.com, I have a drop-down menu and a page which has the links to the videos. So it's titled Videos. And it has in it an interview that we did with the American Jewish University that Walter and I did. And it has this discourse on it as well. Of course, what we talked about today is much more updated. That was recorded in November, but we have also developed a paper, Walter and I, which will go on to the American Jewish University's website. I don't know exactly when, but when it does happen, I'll let Ola know, and she can let you know how you may access that. That has more detail in it.
Fatima will add your website to the chat. And Alma, you had a question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to phrase it as a question and not a statement, or it was triggered when we were talking about Jewish Voice for Peace, and talking about I have reservations too about that more extreme anti-Zionist view that I think has done harm to the protests, because if they were focused on just on the injustices, on what's the 35,000 people killed in Gaza, focused on that, and rather than demonizing Israel, that's not a helpful thing to do. But I guess my question is that I go to things like this where there's an attempt to bring people together, or I go to Combatants for Peace or whatever. But then I'm very involved in J Street in my political approach to Israel. But in a way, I think how we all believe in that, but in some ways, I think people who join in these kinds of discussions, it's almost like preaching to the choir, because there's already a lot of common thinking, and in a way it's like being in a silo of its own. And where I will just go to J Street because certain other kinds of groups, Jewish groups, I don't feel comfortable because I can't express what I really feel. And then there's that weaponizing of anti-Semitism, which I feel if I express how I feel about what's happening in Gaza or about the oppressive conditions of the occupation. And I've gone on J Street trip with a congressional delegation where we spend half the time in the West Bank. So I feel like I know a lot. I don't, but I have a feeling for the situation of being a Palestinian in the West Bank. But in many mainstream Jewish venues which I often always frequent, I'm Jewish, I sense that if I express these views, which I feel very comfortable in my J Street Zoom things, then I could be accused of being anti-Semitic. And I'm, even disturbed that ADL, which is an organization that I've long supported, that now with their definition of anti-Semitism and being so focused on criticism of Israel, that this is very disturbing to me too. And I think my question is, like, it's wonderful to talk about bringing people together, but then we end up being in our own little silos where everybody agrees on with this. And how does this have any impact in a larger sense, or even like in Israel, especially with this current horrible government? I mean, when you have, the settlers who believe God gave us this land, and, that's, I'm working on a memoir, and some of it, it goes in I see the conflict in terms of Isaac and Ishmael, and Sarah and Hagar, and it's almost like it's some metaphysical or mystical level that has to be healed, that difference.
Yes.
And so, but I don't know, again, I don't know exactly what my question is. It had to do more with us being in these silos, even if they're like good silos.
I just have a question. Did you feel uncomfortable when you're around people that are from Jewish Voices for Peace? How do you feel uncomfortable, or what happens?
Well, I think that they tend to be more demonizing of Israel. That's what I don't want to do, is be involved in demonizing Israel. You can criticize the current government, but you can't hold Israel as, out as the monster. It's the current government. It's, people in Israel, and you have to recognize the trauma of October 7th, which has pushed, I guess, Israelis generally further to the right. But this is upsetting to me too. That's why I will go to Combatants for Peace or other groups that have Muslims and Jews together, because that more mirrors how I feel. But I think there is a tendency of the more leftist Jewish organizations that are anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, to I can't relate to that. That's what I'm saying.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah, well, I
I
mean,
think-
Combatants for Peace and the other organizations that are on the ground. I mean, I know Combatants for Peace, and they do things with the people on the ground, which is
Well, they're in Israel.
they're in Israel, yeah.
Yes,
So
that's
that
right.
it was created because of two different men where both of their daughters were killed, and they decided, we have to do something together to
Yeah,
stop this for the future generations.
It's made up of Palestinians who lost a family member to
Right.
Israeli violence, and Israelis who lost
Yes.
family member to Palestinian violence.
Yeah.
And some of them had so much hatred, but they eventually found this as the best path to because the status quo was not sustainable.
Well, that's the key point. That's the key point, Alma. And I think that the American Jewish community is all kind of confused and pain, in pain and many other things. But the problem, the main thing about the status quo is not sustainable. That was what was proven on October 7th. As horrible, as awful as it was, What it did was shine a light on the fact that that Israel cannot go on oppressing the Palestinians indefinitely. That is what, and the world now has said that very clearly. So the immediate response of much of the Jewish community, which I should say, and this is very important, the point that's often missed, enabled the movement of Israel to the right, the movement of Israel to say we can impose a solution on the Palestinians. That's been Netanyahu's argument for 20 years, and before him there were other Likud leaders who said we can do these settlements, the whole thing, we can have the whole thing, we can have the whole package. You know, we can have the settlements, we can have the whole land of Israel, we can have peace with Saudi Arabia. You know, trust us. And honestly, and many people on, you know, the J Street people, myself, many million others were saying this is not going to work. At some point, this is going to blow up because you can't go around the belt. Hello, it blew up. Now what? Now what? Right? So I think that that one thing that will help, and you have the problem of the Israelis. You know, their immediate thing is obviously to, you know, just say the whole world is against us, it's anti-Semitism and all of that. But I do think that if we do push we do push the Biden administration, and that's the process that started, hasn't gone all that well, but to take a stand to Israel and say, look, if you go on using these weapons, American weapons, for doing things that are essentially war crimes, then we're going to cut off the weapons. And that, Biden did hold back one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. And I think that was not insignificant. I haven't seen a lot of recognition. I mean, I know that in the pro-Palestine community, in the Muslim community, there's a feeling like, we should just throw Biden and, maybe Trump is better, as horrible as he is, as Biden has betrayed us, or and I would say I agree that the Biden administration has been sort of more incoherent and say a little bit here, give something to the Palestinian side, the supporters of the Palestinians in America, so they can feel a little better and good enough to vote for us, but we can't push the Jews away either. So it's very, very tough. I do feel for them, actually, but I also feel that if the Biden administration is reelected, that they'll be willing to put more pressure than on Israel. I think they're caught in a political stance. So I don't know, but yeah, just to come back to your point though, because I've wandered a little bit, I've digressed a little bit. It's very, very hard time in the American Jewish community, and we had become so used to that. Israel was like the poster child of America, and everything was fine, and we would, and that suddenly, that's probably over. And so now there was that article in the New Yorker, was it? Not the Atlantic, about the golden age of American Jewry is over. And on some level, that's right. Although that golden age probably had some pretty big flaws. That's what I would say.
Yeah. There was I guess people weren't realizing the other side, or having come to the realization that there's pain and ignoring totally. There's 7 million, Jews in Israel and 7 million Palestinians.
Right.
Maybe a lot of people don't know that it's an equal number. So it's a huge amount of people in a very small area. And I always tell my a friend of mine who's a rabbi, I said, it is the Holy Land. Like we all need to be together in it. And it's a very sacred place. So we should all be peacefully living together. That's the dream. But Bishal, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, Walter.
Oh, Michelle, nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Hey. Okay, so here's my question to both of you. I know you're focused in on interfaith and getting all these communities together, but I don't see it's that big a group. I mean, even, outside of the immediate metropolitan area, I don't think, for most Americans, I hate to say it, they're not focused in on this. They're really not. I mean, right now with the political climate going on, I think this Israeli-Palestinian situation is very targeted to certain areas. And I know most of my friends honestly don't give it a second thought anymore. And it's a shame. I agree, it's a shame, but how do you think you're gonna get past that? The younger people are involved. But people that are, you know, in their 40s, 50s, they have their own lives. What do you think you're gonna do that's gonna bring people to make this an important issue? To people that aren't already talking to the choir. We're all here talking to the choir.
You know, you raise a very important question, and this is something that I and my husband have struggled with. And now I'm not even talking about Muslim-Jewish relations. I'm just talking about raising awareness about Muslims in the US. Post 9/11, we felt that it was very important. We put a face to the faith. We get to know people. We raise awareness about Islam. We go give talks. You know, the whole spiel. And we very soon realized, and Ola already said, we gave 250 talks in 100 cities. That's not enough. And we very soon realized that we were preaching to the choir, that we were only being invited by those who were willing to listen. So I remember that at Chautauqua, there was a professor from Emory who gave a talk, and she was saying, if you want to, and she's talking to everybody, if you want to reduce conflict, you have to do that not by giving facts and figures and statistics, but by telling stories. So tell stories, and that will change hearts and minds. So I went to the microphone and I asked her, I said, you know, my husband and I are trying to do this and raise awareness about Islam, and this is what we are finding out. And we would really want people, the skeptics, the hardliners, the ones at the fringes, to invite us into their space, because they're the ones we really need to talk to. So what do you suggest? And her response was, they are not going to invite you. So tell your stories to us, people like us, and we will tell your stories to them. But then she also made another point. She said, don't overestimate the open-mindedness of your audience. Know that there are some skeptics who are present, and that is a start. So my appeal to this group here or anybody else that I am in contact with is, please tell our point of view or share our stories with people who you know will not be willing to engage with us, but may listen to what you have to say. And now that's a very indirect and roundabout way of doing that. It's harder. It has less impact. But I don't see an alternative, that people are not willing to listen. Some people will not be willing to listen.
But I think a lot of people are seeing things in that age group. They're starting to look at different forms of media, seeing things that disturb them. And, you know, for a lot of us, it's become like overwhelming, actually. And you know, kind of, it's not normal to see this type of destruction and you know, babies, like, you know, held, death, dying in front of people in their arms, and I like all this grief and all this horror. It's not a normal thing for us to be watching. You know, it's not a good thing for your heart to see on a everyday basis. But I think a lot more people are seeing these things. I think now some of the public media is catching up slowly but surely, and trying to be, you know, balanced a little bit in their presentation to the general public. But I think a lot of people now are going to other forms of media to really try to get information. So I'm not sure, Michelle, but maybe you know people that are just like in their little world, you know, doing their own thing and not wanting to deal with anything.
I think we've become very desensitized, because it's not only this issue. I mean, you see what's happening in Haiti and you see the horror there. You know what's happened in Somalia. And as an American, eventually you just become totally desensitized. I can't cure the world. But I also feel, and Sabeeha knows this, I think a lot of the problems with the Palestinians were brought on by themselves, not just the Jews, prior to this. and Sabeeha and I have talked about it, but we have open dialogue. I have many Muslims in my building. I don't even bring this up because they have their opinion, I have mine. It doesn't matter. We say hello, we're nice to each other, and that's all that really matters. I don't think we all have to agree or disagree. I think we just have to be able to get along and not dislike each other. And I don't feel that in my buildings here. And I have a lot of Muslims, a lot of Jews. I have a huge complex here. But I think, there's a lot of animosity, especially with the young and with the progressives that sort of, let's go out and fight. And that's not what you want. But I want to know how you think you're going to spread the word aside from those that believe in you, you know?
Yeah, I think one thing that we both, Sabeeha and I both feel it's very important to humanize both sides, and so that people don't form these kind of they are evil, full stop, because that's really, really, really unhelpful. And unfortunately, that's what's most of the narrative has been in recent months, and how we're struggling to turn that around in our small way, but we'll do everything we
And
can.
one of the reasons why Walter and I decided, it was Walter's idea to start a podcast, is that we are trying to reach different audiences, and it will only broaden our audience if we explore and communicate through these various mediums. Some in my network will only do email. Some hate emails, they only do text messages. Some will only do Instagram. Some hate Facebook.
Mhm.
Some like Facebook but don't like Instagram. Some do Twitter, X now. And some don't like to read, but they like to listen. Some don't like to listen, they like to watch. So it's fine to reach use all these platforms to reach as much of a diverse audience as we can. That's what we are doing.
I see we only have 5
Listen,
minutes.
But I mean, having people to your home, like inviting people to your home for like tea or coffee
Exactly.
or whatever, or just, so that, after 9/11, when I used to go talk in different places, I'm like, your neighbor, if they have a scarf and I didn't wear a scarf, then I would forget one and take it off. I'm like, I'm the same person. I'm like, they're just freaking out like you. I said, don't worry, like just invite them over for tea and talk. They're just scared as you are. So I think also in this instance, like if you, especially in your building, have some Muslim neighbors and you get along, and I live next door down the street from a synagogue. I have Jewish neighbors. We're all very friendly. We invite them for our barbecue. They invite us. I mean, it's important to have those types of relationships within your own neighbors, specifically, so that they do get to know you, and as time progresses, then you might be able to have those conversations with them. But I think it's a nice thing to reach out to people, and like when I invited the rabbi and Lisa, they were like so touched. It was during Ramadan. They'd never been to a Muslim home. I'm like, we're shocked. I have another Cantor friend. She said, I realized that I don't know any Muslims except you. Well, that's a big problem right there. So, I mean, reaching out to others is very important.
But you have mosques that don't reach out. And Sabeeha and I have talked about this. You have a tribal community that the mosques you have the biggest mosque going right here on 96th Street. And they never invite anybody in for any function.
Very
Now,
true.
if you want to broaden your viewpoints, you should bring people in. The Jewish community does it all the time. The Christian community does it all the time. But I
Yeah,
hate
we do it in our mosque.
Well, the biggest mosque is right here on 96th.
I don't know anybody there, but I will find out and I'll pass the word.
If you want to broaden your viewpoint and get people to understand both sides, you have to be a little more welcoming. And we don't feel that way a lot of places versus, you see many temples doing it, you see many Christian organizations, but you don't see that many on the Muslim side, guys. So I think, if you want to get the message out, I think you need to participate more.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for all the mosques. I know I can only speak for ours. And we've had interfaith teas, we've had interfaith Ramadan events and things like that. And then actually we had a barbecue yesterday where we invited, I work with refugees and we have volunteers that are Jewish and Christian and everybody volunteers, so everybody was invited and it
You know
was
who does
open for all.
who does do it and do it very well in New York is the Islamic Center of New York University. They're not
Yes.
they're a center, but they are like open as in open and embracing everybody. And that's
Imam Khalid Latif. Yeah.
Khalid. That's a model I like. Ola, I have to go.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I understand it's we're going so fast and the time is running and we didn't realize and you have to catch a train. So
I'm going to stay another few
really
minutes.
appreciate that.
And I so appreciated your comments and your questions and appreciate everything that you are doing to keep our communities together. But most of all, for those of you who joined, this is a Memorial Day weekend. People are out barbecuing, and you actually took an hour and a half out of your day to come and listen to what we have to say. And I truly, truly appreciate it.
Yes, we appreciate you being here with us and thank you for squeezing us into your schedule, Sabeeha and Walter. You guys are very busy. I understand that you have to go. And if anybody has one last question, otherwise we're going to close because we just want to honor Sabeeha's timing. And wanted to thank everybody. We usually we ask for one thing that's important is something called gratitude sharing. And if you can share with us what you learned today, please put your answers in the chat or you can tell us, verbally, or most importantly, how will you share what you learned today with your family and friends? So if you feel comfortable putting that in the chat, fine. If not, just think about it and we hope you will share what you learned today with others. And we just think it's important to pass this on, like kind of like a domino effect. And again, once again, if you donate $100 to our common beliefs, and you'll receive a free copy of the We Refuse to Be Enemies. And Sister Fatuma Hydra is our technical assistant, and she'll be shipping that book from her online bookstore, Tuma's Books. And you must send an email to our common beliefs after you've sent your donation. So I need your address and full name so that she can actually mail the book. I won't be able to mail it if I don't have that. And Fatuma will put the donation link in the chat and our common beliefs email. And we'll be sending a survey out. I'm not sure if Fatuma has it ready. If not, we'll be sending it out on our email. But if she has it ready, it'll be in the chat. And we appreciate you filling out the survey. It kind of really helps us know like what kinds of programs we do in the future. And we thank you all so very much and thank Fatuma for being a great technical assistant and for Walter and Sabeeha for really enlightening us today and sharing with us so many insights for building peace and communication. And we'd love to take, and I have to ask permission, and I would love to take a group photo, but Sabeeha's gone, so I'm not going to do that now. I think I took a couple of pictures before. So we'll be ending our program with the call to prayer. And it's the same reciter, Omar Hisham Arabi. And you're welcome to stay and listen. It's going to be our prayer time soon. So it's very peaceful and very nice. So I will be sharing my screen for a second. And as I'm speaking and listening, if you have any other questions that didn't get answered, put them in the chat. We can get them to answer them later. So here we go.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Thank you so much, everybody. And oops, so sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry. Sorry. So sorry. Forgot to press stop the YouTube. I'm so sorry. Any we thank you so much. If you have any questions, please email them to me. We'd appreciate you filling out the survey, and we wish you a blessed afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Walter, so much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.